Joining us on the line is Paris Dennard. He's a longtime GOP strategist, communications expert, serving as the RNC national spokesperson and director of Black Media Affairs. You can follow him on Twitter at Paris Dennard. Paris, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ben. It's really a great honor. You know, today our own RNC chairman launched her own podcast, and I told her that I was coming on your show, and she was like, wait a minute, you're not doing my podcast? I said, no, I got to do Ben Shapiro. He is the best. He is the groundbreaking person who's been doing this forever. He's number one. She's like, okay, I understand. Ben's great. So again, it's a great pleasure to be with you.
Well, I appreciate it. So let's talk about the outreach that the RNC has been doing to minority communities. You've been talking a lot about how Republicans flipped the town of McAllen, Texas red in a local mayoral race. And we've been seeing greater Republican inroads to the shock of the media in particularly Hispanic areas in Florida and Texas as well. What sort of outreach has the RNC been doing of recent vintage that is different from what they've been doing historically?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the fact is, RNC Chairwoman McDaniel has been very intentional on our engagement efforts. And it's not just been talking about it, it's been actually putting resources behind it. And so she announced a $2 million investment that was going to go to expanding and reopening our Black Voices community centers that are going to be going in target states, not just in the presidential year, but this year leading up to the midterms. And then we'll have more to come with other groups as well, with our Asian community as well as our Hispanic community. But when you look at the things that we're doing, it's our messaging. It's having good candidates that are actually talking about the issues that are mattering to these people. When you talk about McAllen, Texas, it's the fact that we flipped that seat, 85% Hispanic. But that's not the only thing. If you look at the last election, we were intentional, our engagement efforts in like states like California, where we had Michelle Park Steele, Young Kim, and Mike Garcia. And the statistic that I like to always share a lot with people is that of the seats that we flipped, over a dozen last cycle, all of the people who won those races that were Republicans were either a minority, a veteran, or a woman. And so the face of the party, the reach of the party, and the people who are leading the party, it's changing because President Trump and Republicans last cycle really laid the roadmap for where we are today. And we're continuing on that engagement effort, and we're seeing dividends in it.
So Paris, how much do you think this is RNC outreach abilities and efforts? And how much do you think is the fact that the Democrats seem to have embraced the most radical form of intersectionalism without actually even listening to the viewpoints of minority folks? So what you see over and over from the Democratic Party is the promotion of particular agenda items that many people in the supposed targeted racial minorities just don't agree with. So if you're talking about the Hispanic community, you see the Democrats now using the term Latinx. I don't know a single Latino person who uses the term Latinx. It doesn't exist. Right. The only people who use it are idiots on Twitter and apparently members of the upper echelon of the Democratic Party. In the Black community, they've been pushing the idea of defund the police. Right now, we're seeing in the New York mayoral race that 77% of likely Democratic voters in that race want more cops on the subways. The notion that Black Americans are desperately calling for fewer police officers is just, it's a chimera. It's ridiculous. So do you think that this is Republicans being good at their job or Democrats being really, really bad at their job?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, it's a lot of the Democrats being bad at their job. Let's start there. And being wrong on all the issues that matter. So the things that you laid out are true, especially when you talk about defunding the police. There was the Democrats issued their own study recently, and it highlighted the fact that they failed when it came to messaging and trying to persuade minority voters to vote for them. And they saw that things like defunding the police was not resonating because it left minority communities in particular, not our urban communities, unsafe and vulnerable. And you saw the rise in violence and crime and deaths. And so what the Republican Party, what the RNC is doing is actually being on the offense. It's calling them out, trying to hold them accountable for the border crisis that's happening, for the food inflation that's disproportionately impacting minority communities, and which is essentially a tax on the middle class, really that's what it is, and for the things that are happening with the defund the police movement and Black Lives Matter, and that organization, which seems to be simply profiting off of the claims that they're actually think that they believe that Black lives do matter, but you don't see the evidence in the things that they're doing or funding or supporting. And so we are on the offense. We're holding them accountable. We are in Black newspapers. We're on Asian newspapers as well, and Hispanic television stations and papers and radio, because we want to get the message out there. And when we see a moment that we can message and show that we have Republican leadership, that is leading the way, especially with our governors, we are going to take that moment and do that. And then you look at what happens in the elections. Well, you look at Texas, like we saw, not only just McAllen flipping that seat, but you saw the turnout last cycle with Webb County. 95% of the residents are Hispanic. Starr County, another majority minority county that President Trump and the GOP outperformed their 26 results by 55%. So the proof is in the engagement and the intentionality behind that engagement, seizing the moment, calling the Democrats out for their foolishness and their pandering, and telling the people we have a different way. Give the Republican Party a first look or a second look, and we'll have candidates that will deliver for you.
You know, Paris, you mentioned the word pandering there, and it does seem as though the Democratic Party is deeply invested in pandering on a racial basis. They seem to believe that most Americans think of themselves primarily in terms of racial group. And what the studies tend to suggest that this is just not the case. The Democrats very often end up making the same case as alt-right white supremacists, which is that basically America can be divvied by race and that demographics is destiny. That as America becomes more diverse, necessarily it will become far more left. The left seems to accept this. So does the alt-right white supremacist right. And the reality is that that's just not the case. More and more Americans are engaged in interracial marriage, for example. More and more Americans who are ethnically Hispanic have started to identify as white, according to demographic reports. That doesn't suggest that everybody is trying to be white. That suggests that people don't see their ethnic identity as core to their identity nearly as much as the thoughts that are in their head and the ideas that they have about life. That's always been sort of the Republican idea, is that we treat people as individuals regardless of race. The Democrats want to treat people by group. That seems to be increasingly a failing message, disconnected from the reality that people are living on the ground.
You're absolutely right, Ben. I remember something that Secretary Condoleezza Rice said, and she goes, race is a factor, but it should not be the factor. And a lot of times Democrats make race the factor. And right now what you're seeing is the heightened sense of division and using racial things to divide the country, like Black Lives Matter and the organization, and obviously the critical race theory. All of these things are in an attempt to divide people and to make people think that you are oppressed and you're an oppressor. The fact that the New York Times journalist said that she was, deeply disturbed by the fact that she saw an American flag on a truck. I mean, it's just like Flag Day must have been just really bad for her this year, because the idea that the flag would be a trigger for you. A friend of mine, Abby Pickens, down in Dallas, Texas, she is in school, in a private school, and she tried to get the Pledge of Allegiance to be said at the school to unify in this moment. And they said, no, that's too divisive. It would be offensive, and it's racist. That's where Democrats are. The radical left, endorsed by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, make no mistake about it, are doing this to divide the nation, because they know that if you divide people and have people hate one another, it gives them a cause. It gives them a reason and to keep people angry and upset and fearful. But at the end of the day, we need to be pushing American exceptionalism. We need to be pushing the fact that all men are created equal. We need to be pushing the fact that people want to be unified and be together because we are Americans. Hyphenated Americans who should be no more. We are Americans, and be united by that. And when you see Omar and AOC and the things that they say about Israel and Hamas and Palestine, it's disgusting to see where we are, especially where the Democrats are, and how much they are getting away with anti-Semitism especially. So this type of divide and conquer tactics of the left, I think, is going to continue to be rejected, because people are going to see it for what it is. They're not interested in people, empowering people. They're interested in politics and dividing people along racial lines, and it's wrong.
We're speaking with Paris Dennard. He's longtime GOP strategist, communications expert. He is the RNC national spokesperson and director of Black Media Affairs. So, Paris, we're looking forward to 2022. I've told the assembled members of the Republican Congressional Caucus that if they fail to win back the House in 2022, every one of them should lose their job, considering these sort of forces that are moving in favor of the backlash against Biden's big spending plans. I mean, we've seen the inflation kick in. We have seen slower job growth than I think any of the economic experts sort of suggested. And obviously we have President Biden wandering around on the world stage. When I say wandering, I mean wandering. Like, he literally looks like he's just going to wander into walls at this point. So if Republicans don't win back the House, that would be truly kind of incredible. But Republicans have sort of a tougher road to hoe when it comes to the Senate. What are the top Senate races that Republicans should be focusing in on at this point? Because obviously we have a 50-50 split in the Senate. There are some vulnerable Republican seats, but there are some vulnerable Democratic seats as well.
That is true. I think the real thing that I want to encourage everyone out there is we cannot let up. there are there are Senate seats that we have to keep our eye on, but I don't want to get ahead of anything. But I would just say this: we've got to turn out the vote. And that's what the RNC is going to be committed to doing, having the resources that when people get out of their primaries, that we can have the ground game, the data, and the necessary resources to win and get the GOTV, which is get out the vote. But ultimately, we've got to be there. That means voter registration is something that we're taking very seriously. That means if you move, making sure that you register, get your family registered, and get your friends registered, and then actually vote. No matter what, the issue of election integrity is one that is very serious, and we understand that and are working aggressively to make sure things like S1, HR1, before now S1, and all of these radical policies that are trying to be codified on the local level do not happen. But ultimately, the onus is on us as Republicans to be on the offense and make sure we vote and vote in all of these elections, even the school board elections. But the House, you're right. We should win back the House. The history is on our side, but also I think our policies are on our side where we are today. But the Senate is a little bit tougher, but we can do it if we all turn out to vote and do not be deterred by people trying to dissuade us and not voting and not trusting the election systems. The way we beat any system is by overpowering them with the vote. Democrats, Stacey Abrams, they're not going to let up. Republicans cannot, because we have the win on our side. We have the facts on our side. We have the data on our side. We have the policies on our side.
It's Paris Dennard. Again, he is the RNC National Spokesperson, Director of Black Media Affairs. You can follow him on Twitter at Paris Dennard. Really appreciate the time, Paris, and good luck with the chairwoman's new podcast as well.
If it's successful as yours, she'll be all right.
I appreciate it.